Welcome to the Lessons for Luca podcast. I'm your host, Michael Santi, author of New Man Emerging, transformational trainer and coach. Most importantly, I'm Luca's dad. This podcast is the discovery and the exploration and the conversation of what it means to be a good man and what it means to live a good life. And when I look at fulfillment and the domains and the arenas of our life, relationship is fundamental. We are by nature a social creature. We crave, need, desire, connection, a sense of belonging. Now we get that in a lot of ways. We get that with our friends. We get that with our family. We get that with, the people that are in our tribe or in our camps and the people we relate to and things like that. Like we crave that, but we've also need to distinguish that our most committed relationship, our marriage, it has to stand on its own and be distinct from every other relationship. And that's what I want to talk about today, because there are so many of my clients that come into my world because there is this friction or challenge or miscommunication or these different worldviews that come into collision between partners. And so today I want to talk about, I have 5 rules for marriage. If you stick around to the end, I'll give you a bonus 6th one for your marriage or for all of your relationships. But these rules of marriage help create a framework and guardrails for how we interact with each other, how we relate to each other, how we communicate to each other. I've actually personally and professionally, I've married a lot of my friends and a lot of my clients, and it's a really great honor to be asked to marry someone that I care about, or I've spent so much time with, or I've influenced their life in a particular way that they would want me to be, part of that special day to marry them. So it's a funny thing, though. I always ask, a lot of times people always expect me to ask them, like, well, as you go forward, as you're married, what are you going to do to keep the flame alive? What are you going to do to, keep your connection strong? And I rarely ever ask that. More often than not, I'll ask, when times get tough, what are you going to do? When you come into friction and you're miscommunicating, what's off limits? What do you promise each other you won't say, you won't do? What guardrails do you have in place when you're actually at a challenge point? When you're having a hard time communicating, what will you do then? Because it will inevitably happen. If you think of the early part of our life when we're single or even dating, like so much of our life is spent on our own, where we're developing habits and behaviors and our worldview and the ways we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to others. We've picked up and downloaded so much from our parents and from our history and from their history that on our own, a lot of those mindsets and habits and behaviors and worldviews, they're not challenged. And then we meet someone and we share this love and affection and respect and trust and attraction and this whole soup of hormones and new ways of thinking and looking at our future and how do we interact and be together and share and communicate and cooperate. And now all of a sudden, all of those habits and all of those behaviors that I have really never have been challenged in my singlehood are now, they all get flushed and to the surface, and a light is shined on them. And sometimes we don't really love what we see. I always say, if you don't heal your inner world and your history, I promise you, your relationships will bring them to the surface for you, and you can work on them then. Because there's these parts of us, of our emotionality, our emotional body, our psyche, our mind, these places that we suppress and repress and escape from, that on our own we never really have to deal with. we tend to double down on them through familiarity, and we operate as though like this is kind of the water that we swim in. Well, then when we bring someone into the fold and into our life, and we're doing it in such a vulnerable way where we really depend and rely on them for certain things, for emotional needs and spiritual needs and physical needs, then you add in things like financial needs and children. If you have the opportunity to be parents, that becomes really, really complex and complicated. And if we don't have skill sets or guardrails or rules that we interact with, that can become incredibly, incredibly challenging. And so what I want to do is I want to give you in this episode, I want to give you my personal rules for marriage, the guardrails that my wife and I live by, and hope that they could create some level of foundation and some level of stability in just creating a playing field and a blueprint that you can more effectively communicate with your partner with. And for full transparency, I do not have some sort of accreditation of marriage counseling or relationship counseling. I do coach a lot of men on marriage. I probably, similar to many of you, learned a lot about myself in relationship, mostly by messing them up in my history. And so that level of self-awareness through the mistakes that I've made in the past and reconciling my own selfishness and my own blind spots and my own levels of unconsciousness and lack of awareness to grow and to learn from that has really created the marriage that I have today. I would say that my second credential would be that I would not trade my marriage for anything in the world. And that being my experience, I think generates some level of, well, we must be doing something right. So that being said, I want to get into, what are the 5 rules of marriage that have worked for my wife and I. The overall, as I talked about those inevitable moments where we come to friction or we come to miscommunication, we see the world differently, like that's natural. I want to stress that is natural. Men and women look at the world differently. Homosexual couples, they look at the world differently. The way you look at the world when you're young, when you first get married, to when you're older, you're going to look at the world differently. You're going to interact with the world differently. So it's inevitable that you are going to come to friction points, not out of lack of love, but out of just seeing the world differently. And our ability to communicate in that friction point is really what creates solid, foundational, fundamentally healthy, sustainable marriages. And our inability at those friction points to withhold love or to withhold vulnerability and to retreat into your old familiar patterns or your old unconscious patterns, that's what actually creates the distance, which over time really makes your marriage and your love in your marriage unsustainable. I say it all the time, most marriages don't end due to lack of love. Most marriages end due to miscommunication. But if we don't have the skill sets in communication, how are we expected to actually break through friction and challenge points? So my overarching point of view of marriage is really, really simple. We always want to make sure that our life is better together than on our own. And to do that, we really want to look at life or marriage rather, or a married life as a cooperative process. And so that's actually our first rule of marriage. Number one rule of marriage: throw away your scorecards. So many of us come into our marriage from this posture of competition, this posture of I will do X and you will do this, and unconsciously I'm going to keep score of that. And I have found that takes up so much room in our emotional space, in our psyche, that we hold on to things way too long, that resentments build. Throw away your scorecards really constantly helps us clear the space. I'm not holding on to something that you did weeks ago. My wife's not holding on to something that I did earlier this morning. We're not keeping track of things. We're not checking off boxes of who's ahead and who's behind. Just throw away the scorecards. Throw away the scorecards and put your swords down. And the way that this shows up in a lot of relationships, in a lot of marriages, again, throw away your scorecards points us to cooperation rather than competition. We're not sitting here keeping score. We're sitting here saying, how do we make our life together as a unit, as a nucleus, and individually better? There's certain gifts and skill sets that I have. There's certain gifts and skill sets that my wife has. And when they come together, we both win. We both thrive. But when unconsciously we hold scorecards in marriages, we inevitably make our marriages competitions. A competition in the workplace, competition out in the world, competition in sports, all very, very good things. I have not found in 15 years of coaching that competition in marriage makes the marriage better. I have not found that yet. Cooperation makes the marriage better. And I want to highlight two things in this rule because they're actually really subtle. The way that competition in marriage subtly creeps in is really actually through one-upsmanship. And I know that might sound obvious, but it's actually really, really subtle. A lot of times what happens in marriages, especially if children are involved, is when one partner comes and says, oh man, I'm struggling with this, or I have this challenge, or something even as subtle as, wow, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Unconsciously, sometimes from the place of needing significance, when a partner comes in and says, well, you didn't sleep last night, I was up all day with the kid, or I was up all day working, or this and that. What happens is we're cutting off an opportunity for connection. And so we're really dampening that connection. All the partner is doing is communicating, this is where I'm at. And what happens is if a partner comes in and says, well, I have it tougher, you've just suppressed, imploded, dampened, or invalidated an opportunity for connection. It's not to go and play into their victimhood or go and pity them. It's just an opportunity to say, like, oh, here's a door, here's a window, here's an opening. What's it look like? How can I support you here? Is there something that I can do that improves that state? And this is so subtle because every time your partner is communicating to you, this is where I'm at, whether that's small or minuscule or whether that's big and grand, there's a doorway or a window for connection, for possibility. And if we are subtly one-upping each other, it's actually diminishing that opportunity to connect. So this is one way that we keep subtle scorecards. Another way that we keep subtle scorecards is, it becomes a little more obvious, is there's something you did that I didn't like, but I'm not going to communicate it. I'm going to withhold it and I'm going to bring it up later. And I'm going to use it against you. I'll talk more about that in another rule, but be aware of that. That is another way of keeping scorecards. It's another way of turning your marriage into a competition. And then finally, there's another subtle way that we interact with keeping scorecards in marriages, which is coming from the base assumption that marriage is 50-50. I have not found that that is effective. Marriage is actually rarely 50-50, whether that's emotionally or financially or anywhere that we are giving input and in some level of giving and receiving or emotionality. Like if it's 50-50, that's great, but that is also not going to be sustainable. More often than not, in certain domains of marriage, it will be skewed, and that's actually okay. There, in each domain, whether that's the financial domain or the spiritual domain, the parenting domain, the leisure domain, the health domain, partners are going to have different skill sets. And so what may come really naturally in one domain, let's say the financial domain, where I could lead really a lot more effectively, well, in another domain, something may become way more naturally to my wife, something may come way more naturally to your partner, and in that domain they lead. What's important is to actually communicate, like, where are we most effective? Not what is it supposed to look like, or what does it look like to the outside world or to history or to, no, what's it look like for us? And so even down to a mundane level or a daily level, like, there's some days where you just don't have as much in the tank as you did yesterday or the week before. Communicate that. Where are you at right now? I'm at 70%. I'm at 50%. I'm at 30%. I could really use some time alone. I could really use 15 minutes to just unwind a bit. Great. I'll pick up the slack. How could I step up here? And so that you get the support that you need. And can I communicate that when I need it? That doesn't happen when we're unconsciously keeping score. That only works when we're engaged in the moment. We're very clear about our inner world, what we need, where we're thriving, where we're lacking, where we need some help, where we need some support, and then communicating it. If you have scorecards, you're going to keep check, and you're going to unconsciously tally things up when you're even doing just mundane tasks like washing the dishes or paying the bills. And if you're just keeping all of that score, it's going to build resentment, and it's going to diminish connection between you and your partner. So that's rule number one. Throw away your scorecards. Rule number two is a big one. Rule number two is expect nothing, request everything. If you want to destroy your relationship, have expectations. Another simple saying of that is, expectations are the thief of joy. And what I want to distinguish expectations from requests. Expectations are standards that you have, but you don't have the courage to communicate them. And if you have expectations and you haven't had the courage to communicate those expectations, I promise you something is going to go awry. I have not met your partner. There's a very good chance, if you're listening to this, I've never met your partner. Now, even if I have met your partner, great. If I haven't met your partner, I can actually promise you one thing, even not having ever met them: they cannot read your mind. I did not marry a mind reader. My wife did not marry a mind reader. I promise you, you didn't marry a mind reader. Most people have trouble and a challenge understanding what it is that they want personally. What are my needs? What are my desires? What are the things that really light me up? Most people are actually challenged just in that. So how are we to expect someone else to know what it is that we actually need if we don't communicate it? So expect nothing, request everything is constantly inviting us into the courage to communicate where we're at, to communicate what we want, to communicate what we desire, and to communicate what we need. Without that, we create opportunity and we create a foundation for resentment. If I am constantly expecting from my wife things that I have not communicated to her, I am breeding a fertile ground of resentment. And in that resentment, resentment is actually a French word, ressentiment, which means to refeel. And what happens when I don't have the courage to communicate, I am now projecting onto my wife, like, you are making me feel this. You're making me re-feel this. Well, to re-feel something is to re-feel it from my own history, which my wife has nothing to do with. All of that point of origin, all that personal experience was downloaded into me before I even met my wife. And so to put it on her, not only to put it on her, but then to expect her to know how to correct it in me is an impossibility. And so if I don't have the courage to communicate something that I want, communicate something that I need, or communicate something that I desire, that's on me. I cannot put that on her, because if I don't have the courage to communicate it, how is she going to even have the blueprint to navigate it? And so when we drop our expectations and we move them into requests, requests are powerful. Requests require that I am clear about what I'm asking for. Requests require two parties, the communicator and the listener, and requests need to be clear and actionable, meaning they're not left open to ambiguity. If I say to my wife, I need more patience, that's not very clear. That could be left open to interpretation. My wife might think, oh, I thought I was being really patient. But if I say to my wife, my request is that, if I leave clothes on the floor, you don't have some big sigh and deep breath, that you just remind me, hey, do you mind picking those up? That's clear and actionable. I don't have to sit here and be like, well, where do I do that? Or my wife doesn't have to sit here and say like, well, where could I add patience? I'm actually giving her a clear blueprint. It looks like this. Now, the other component of requests is that my wife could accept that request, my wife could decline that request, or my wife could renegotiate that request. Like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Totally, I get it. Let's do it. Or, you know what? Doesn't work for me. Sorry. I'm going to decline that. Or that doesn't work for me, but this does. And so now what we've done is, rather than have all of this ambiguity and all this interpretation and actually openings for misinterpretations through expectations, we're really saying, like, this is a standard that I live by. Can we meet this standard? What do we need to meet this standard? And here's my requests. Actually, my wife and I have this really funny, subtle one. When we moved to our house, we have a sink basin, and that sink actually can have just one stream or spray this like really powerful stream. Now, my wife does the dishes. I do all the cooking. My wife does all the cleaning. And so I remember when we first moved here, I would, if I were to wash a pan or anything, I would put it on that high-powered spray, and then I would forget to turn it off, and I would just turn the sink off. And then when my wife would go on and turn the sink on, the spray would go everywhere, and she would get all wet. And my wife came to me and said, I have a simple request. Anytime you use the sink and you clean a pan after you're cooking, can you put it on the one stream? And I thought, wow, this is it right here in marriage. The ability, number one, courage to actually say, like, hey, or to say and make the request to me. And also that I'm safe enough that you could say, hey, listen, I think this would work. Can we do this? Now, what happens is every time I remember to do that, my wife feels validated and heard and respected. Every time I do that, I'm honoring that request. I'm saying that the little things that matter to you matter to me. And rather than have the expectation of like, how could you not know? How could you not know to turn that off? Rather than build all that resentment, my wife just simply requests to me. That's something small and little, but it goes a long way. Most of marriage is the little things. So if we can't communicate those little things, if we're not safe enough to communicate them or have the courage enough to communicate them, then that's where those resentments build. Anytime, here's a good indicator of if you know expectations are running your marriage rather than requests. Like I said, you didn't marry a mind reader. Therefore, anytime you default to he should just know, she should just know, I shouldn't have to tell you this. Anytime you notice that your language or your thinking is defaulting to that, it's a good indicator that you're operating out of expectation rather than request. And that is going to actually harbor a lot of resentment and disconnection between you. Like I said, you didn't marry a mind reader. So how should they just know? Also, yes, you do need to tell them. You need to tell them. You need to be specific. You need to be clear and actionable. And here's the other thing. It may not just be once. You may need to say something over and over again. Remember, You built your worldview and your partner built their worldview, and it came together. So therefore, there's a lot in your worldview that your partner doesn't know about, and vice versa. So it's not your job to guess it. It's not your partner's job to guess it. It's your job to be courageous enough to communicate it. Then you could create a blueprint together where that becomes effective and workable. So if you find yourself operating from, they should just know, I shouldn't have to tell them, that's a self-check right there, that you are operating from expectation rather than requesting. The other indicator, if you're operating from expectations rather than request, notice any extreme language. You always or you never. Notice extreme language in your communication, or notice extreme language in your thinking. My wife always or my wife never, or my husband always or my husband never. That's what's called extreme language. You don't build any opportunity for growth and possibility in extreme language. Sometimes your wife does this and sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes your husband does this and sometimes he doesn't. The moment you actually shift it from you always to sometimes or when you, now you have an opportunity to grow or to recommunicate and recalibrate. So be conscious of, I shouldn't have to say it, or be conscious of extreme language. That's a good indicator that this rule is getting lost and deteriorated or missed. Third rule of marriage. Third rule of marriage is set your default to laughter. This is a big one, because there's so many times where people say, like, don't take things personally. That's harder said than done. But when you set your default to laughter, this is a big one in partnerships, because what we're actually doing is we're saying, as we're together, the longer we're together, we're both going to make mistakes. We're both going to be clumsy as we grow. We're both going to be clumsy as we learn new skill sets. As I learn what it is that you love, want, and need, as you learn what it is that I love, want, and need, no one is going to nail that, on the first swing and get it right every time. We're going to be clumsy. When we default to laughter, when we set our default to laughter, we're giving each other the grace to make mistakes. We're giving each other the room and the space to grow and to learn. When we take things personally, when we default to defensiveness, what we end up doing is we posture up. And we posture up and we actually start to go on the defensive and we start to go on the attack. And if you think about this, this is really absurd. We're actually saying that the person that I love the most, the person that loves me the most, is trying to attack me. I need to defend myself against them. That's actually, when we say it out loud, that's actually absurd. When we default to laughter, we're actually saying that I'm willing to be humble enough to laugh at myself. I'm willing to be humble enough that as you try something new, as you learn to grow, as you make mistakes, we could laugh about the absurdity of it. It doesn't mean make fun of each other and poke fun at each other. It means be willing to laugh at our absurdity. Be willing to laugh at and be lighthearted about, as we make our attempts to grow and to succeed individually and together, that we give each other room and space and grace to make mistakes. And then we laugh at the absurdity of it. If our default isn't set to laughter, we start to take our domains and our marriage domain way too seriously. And in that seriousness, we posture up. We get defensive and we go on the attack. If we set our default to laughter, we're actually saying that my partner isn't trying to attack me, that my partner is giving me the space to make mistakes and to grow, and that I reciprocate that same opportunity to my partner. When those defaults are set to laughter, it tends to clear the air faster, and it also tends to give our husbands and give our wives the opportunity to not always need to be perfect. that that we could laugh together, that we could bring our absurdity to each other, that we can try and mess up, that we could succeed and we can fail, and we can laugh about all of it. It neutralizes and diffuses the tension and the seriousness of the space. Remember, the longer we're together, the more we grow, there's going to come these friction points. If you treat these friction points as attacks and opportunities to position yourself to be defensive, you're going to miss the growth in it. If you position yourself that we get to laugh when we come to these friction points, it diffuses the tension that's there, and it gives us space and opportunity to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at our absurdity, and to actually grow faster. I have found in my coaching that if you can laugh at your own absurdity, you'll actually grow faster than if you try to meet your failures with excess force and judgment and blame. It's something that I have found that really shifts the energy of remembering or learning that after we laugh, we actually are physiologically changing our body, and we're more susceptible to aha moments or insights. So set your default to laughter. Set your default to laughter. That's our rule of marriage, number 3. Number four, my fourth rule of marriage is give each other the better bite. Now, my wife and I are really big foodies. We love going out to eat. I cook. I love feeding people. I love feasting. I love learning new recipes. I just love the process of gathering and eating. And this rule came when we first got together. Whenever we would cook something, I always remember when I was single, I was like, ooh, I would always identify, oh, that's a really good bite. I'm gonna either save that bite to the end, or I'm gonna really enjoy that bite. And when my wife and I first got together, I remember thinking, I should really give her this bite. And so this rule started really figuratively. And now what we do is anytime we look at our plate, we're like, oh, this is a really great bite. You take it. Well, the thing is I know my wife is doing the same for me. I know that my wife knows I'm going to give her the better bite. I know that she's going to give me the better bite. And what that does overall in our marriage is it makes us remember that someone has our back, that you are looking out for me and I am always looking out for you. I'm going to go out of my way to give you the better bite. This is really, really important because I said it earlier, is the constant assessment and baseline assumption of marriage is that we're better together than on our own. Well, if I need to know that you are going to look out for me and also help me highlight my blind spots. And I also am going to let my wife know I'm looking out for you, and I'll help you navigate your blind spots. I want to reiterate that and reinforce that over and over and over again. I am here to look out for you and to understand and receive and take in. You're looking out for me. Now, one of the ways that will show up in marriages as we grow together, as the years go by, the person you marry and the person they become may not always feel like the same person. We're going to grow, we're going to evolve, we're going to see the world differently and interact with ourselves differently and others differently as we grow and as we continue to evolve. And what that's going to mean is that certain desires and things that your partner wants and needs and really what really lights them up, we want to default to, as I'm giving my wife the better bite, anytime my wife comes to me and says something is really important to me, what giving each other the better bite sets the default to is, that's important to you. What do you need from me to make it happen? This is critical, because although marriages are this unit and this arena of cooperation, you're still going to have your separate lives and separate needs, wants, and desires. So if something is critical for my wife's growth or just her fundamental health, peace of mind, if my wife brings to me something is important to me, I want to set my default to, what do you need from me to make that happen? Oftentimes what people do, especially in marriages that we've been together for a while or we're tired or things are tough, is our partner will bring us something that is a deep desire for them. And then we meet it with, oh, man, that's going to be tough. I don't know if I could do it. You know what? We'll see. Or here you go again with this thing that you want. Like, again, that is going to cut off connection. That is going to cut off the opportunity to cooperate and grow and evolve and provide. So giving each other the better bite is having the safety and the trustworthiness to come to your partner and say, this matters to me, this is important to me. And then it be met with, what do you need from me to make that happen? That's giving each other the better bite. And have that be a two-way street. That if I bring something up and say, hey, this is really important in my business, this is really important in my growth, this is really important in my spiritual life, to know that my wife is going to say, okay, together, how do we figure it out? How do we make it happen? What do you need from me? That could be something really, really big, like some big life goal that you have. That could also be something really small. Hey, listen, I need a break. I need 15 minutes. Okay, great. What do you need from me? You want to practice this not only in the massive, but also in the mundane. Give each other the better bite. Rule number 5 to a thriving marriage. Again, I said most marriages don't end to miscommunicate. Most marriages don't end due to lack of love. Most marriages end due to miscommunication. So rule number 5 is listen to understand rather than to reply. Most of us, when we come to a friction point, we posture up and we get really uncomfortable and we get emotional and it scrambles us up internally, and we're really not even listening to our partner. We're just waiting for an opening that we could give our reply or our rebuttal. And what happens is you're not even really listening to what your partner's saying. When we listen to understand, we're actually injecting humility and empathy into our listening. And it doesn't mean that we have the opportunity or the ability to fix it. It may just mean, I get it, I understand. I may not see the world the same as you. I may not even agree with it, but I understand how you feel that way. I understand how you even came to that conclusion. When we listen to understand, we're actually dropping our defense mechanisms. We're listening with humility, empathy, and a willingness. When we listen to reply or when we listen to make our rebuttal, again, we go into competition mode. Your marriage is not a trial. Your wife is not the jury. You're not trying to state a case here. You're just simply saying, this is where I'm at. When your partner listens to understand that, it builds trust and respect. When you listen to understand where your partner is at, it builds trust and respect. It builds empathy. It builds understanding. Again, you're not going to see the world 100% the same 100% of the time. So when we listen to understand, we're actually being curious. We're exploring our partner and their point of view. We're exploring how they come to that conclusion. We're exploring even their history that says, oh, that makes sense that those dots would connect to this is where that comes from or this is where that is now. Got it. It's not my job to fix it. If I have something that I can inject or interject, if you want it, here it is. If you just want me to listen, so be it. The healing happens when people feel heard. And so if we are constantly just waiting to reply and put our 2 cents in and interject with, well, you're wrong here, here, and here, you're making your marriage into a jury. Rather than, oh, let me listen to understand that. Let me access humility and tell me what you need from me. Oftentimes, when people are communicating in marriages and in relationships, they really just need to feel heard. They just need to be validated. They just need to be understood or feel like you're willing to understand them. Oftentimes, a simple solution when it comes to when you're communicating in your marriage is actually ask. Are you looking for me to just listen, or are you actually looking for solutions? And what that does is it gives you an opportunity to listen a particular way. If you just need me to listen, then go ahead, get it all out. And then here we go, we'll move on. If my wife is actually asking me for solutions, I listen differently. I'll say, okay, this is my opinion, this is what I see, this is my worldview, this is what I would do in that case. 99% of the time, my wife just really wants me to listen. But there are certain times where, hey, you know what? I would really love your opinion on this. I'd love your point of view on this. Got it. Here you go. But I would say that great leaders are great listeners. If you're just constantly coming in and saying, this is the way that it needs to be, should be, and I'm right about it, there's no opportunity for growth there. There's no opportunity for cooperation there. I forget who said it. Maybe it's Plato, but intelligent people are always curious. The foolish are always right. So in our marriages, that's the same thing. If you're curious and you're humble enough to really listen to understand, you'll have way more of an opportunity to move through things together rather than, I'm right, this is how it is, this is how it should be, and this is where you're wrong. That doesn't lead to any growth or reconciliation. It just leads to resentment and to friction. And most of the time later on, they probably won't even bring you the challenges that you have the opportunity to grow and solve together. One indicator here for if I'm listening to understand rather than listen to reply, there's a skill that I use in some of my private coaching that I call act accordingly. What act accordingly means is that my response to this friction, I want it to be, I want to make sure that it's proportionate. And what I mean by that is if my wife gives me a look, just a simple, subtle look, and I just go into like an internal rage, that's not acting accordingly. That response is disproportionate. My wife just might be having a tough day. She actually may not mean anything that I'm interpreting. So if my inner state is rage, that means I'm disproportionate to the actual reality. If my reaction is disproportionate, that means that it's historical for me. It has nothing to do with my wife. That's actually all on me. I get to own that. So I want to make sure that if there's a friction point in marriage, if there's a friction point in communication, I want to make sure that as I'm listening to understand that my responses and my reactivity are proportionate to what's actually happening in reality. That we're able to talk things out and say, this is the way I see it, this is the way you see it, and that it's proportionate. If it's disproportionate, then that means that it's historical from my own history, and I get to figure that out and organize that before I actually, put that on my wife or put that on anyone else. So it's a little cue and clue for you to make sure that you're listening to understand rather than listening to react or to reply or rebuttal. Listening to react and reply and rebuttal is really more of a historical reaction than it is actually engaging in the present moment. I told you if you stuck around to the end, I would give you a bonus rule. This bonus rule really is just a blanket around all of our relationships. It's a simple rule. Be your word. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Follow through. Keep your promises. It makes, when we're our word to ourselves and to other people, we start to operate with a sense of integrity. Integrity builds self-esteem, and integrity builds self-respect. When I say I'm going to do something and I follow through on doing that same thing, when I keep my word, when I am my word, I build esteem and respect because I said I was going to do it, belief, and then I followed through on it and I made it happen, respect. And what happens there is I start to believe my own word, I start to demonstrate my own word, and then my wife or my partner starts to understand, oh, when they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. What that does in our relationships is it builds accountability, it builds trust, it builds respect, and it makes us effective. And this is a funny, subtle thing because being effective isn't really the sexiest compliment we could get. It's like, how's Michael? He's great. He's really effective. It's not like the most attractive, sexy compliment of characteristic anyone can get. However, being effective is vital to being successful. If you want to be successful at anything in life, you've got to be effective. If you want to be successful in your financial well-being, you've got to be effective. If you want to be successful in your health domain, you've got to be effective. Marriage and our relationships are the same thing. If you want to be effective, if you want your partner to see you with a level of respect and trustworthiness and honor and dependability and reliability, be your word. You've got to have integrity. You've got to follow through on the little things and follow through on the big things. Follow through on your being your word with your partner. Follow through on being your word with yourself. When you do that, we build trust and we build respect. We build authenticity. We build all of these rules that we've talked about today. You just create a framework where, you know what? You're trustworthy, you're respectable, you're dependable, you're reliable. You're looking out for me, I'm looking out for you. Integrity and being your word and keeping your promises creates the environment and the soil that could happen over and over and over again. When we're not our word, it creates distrust. It creates disrespect. Things get left open to interpretation. People don't feel validated and significant and worthy of your time. And it starts to build all of this misinterpretation and miscommunication in relationships. So be your word. That's your bonus rule for the day or for the episode. Be your word. So those are my rules for marriage. Throw away your scorecards. Expect nothing. Request everything. Default to laughter. Give each other the better bite. And listen to understand and not to reply. And 6, finally, or as a bonus, be your word, keep your promises. Now, I want to distinguish something because I know some people have some energy on rules. Rules are guardrails. Rules are the reason why let's say in sports, the rules are the reason why someone from China or Spain or South America or America can play soccer without even knowing the language that each other speaks. Rules set the guardrails. And what's really, really important is that, like a rule of going out of bounds in a soccer game or in a football game, rules are simply guardrails. They don't stop the game. They help you recalibrate. If you go out of bounds on first down, great. Here's second down, recalibrate, new play. So rules are not something that we hold over each other. Again, we're not keeping scorecards. We're not saying, hey, you did this, you broke this rule, you did it. Rules are simply guardrails that give us something to recalibrate to, either self-correct to or co-correct to. Hey, I noticed today I was keeping a scorecard on something that you did. I want to express that, let you know about it, and I want to clean it up. That's on me. I noticed earlier today, I told you I would do something. I didn't do it. That's on me. Earlier today, listen, when you were talking, I was sitting, I understood, or I got for myself, I wasn't really listening. I was trying to rebuttal. That's on me. And what we do there, as we follow these rules, are just giving us something to recalibrate to co-correct to, or to self-correct to. Now, what that does is, it doesn't mean that I have to be perfect or my wife has to be perfect. It means that the space between us stays clean and clear. And so that resentment doesn't build and get in the way of our love. Resentment doesn't build and get in the way of our connection. Resentment doesn't build and get in the way of our dreams and our hopes and our visions, individually and collectively together. And so these rules are not something to use as subtle judgments. These rules are something to help you course correct, co-correct, and self-correct too. So don't look at these as judgments to bring down on yourself or judgments to bring down on each other. Use them as guardrails, just like in a game, that when we go out of bounds, we recalibrate to. So these are our rules for marriage. They've worked. They work really, really well. I hope that they work for you. That's my goal and vision for this episode. As always, thank you for being on this journey with me. Until we meet again, be a good man, live a good life, and determine each of those for yourself.